Another very special thing. It's two for the price of one. Two Rabbis Konigsberg. I don't know how it's said. I don't know what the proper English smichut is. If it's Rabbis Konigsberg or Rabbi Konigsbergs, you'll have to tell me. But this is a really special opportunity that we have to learn from a father-son pairing. The bio that I was given is the following. I'm just going to read it verbatim. Father and son, north and south, young and old, sharing wisdom. So with that, I turn it over to the Rabbis Konigsberg.
Good morning. I'm Randy Konigsberg. I'm at Beth Shalom B'nai Israel in Manchester, Connecticut. We have this beautiful music, this love music that talks, because this is the time we talk about this relationship, this marriage between God and the people of Israel. And so the question that came to us is, who is this partner of ours? Who is this person? Who is this God that we are marrying? So with Shavuot, we really consider revelation and who is being revealed. It's all about God. And so what is this Torah about that God gives us? And how are we supposed to teach, not this Torah to God, but how do we teach who this person we're in a relationship with? How do we teach that our children? How do we teach others about God? And it got me thinking, well, I have a son, he's a rabbi. How did I teach him about God? And then, now he's a parent. His children are still a little small, but he's going to have the responsibility of teaching God to his children. And so how is that going to happen? I think that these are questions that just aren't my questions. They aren't just Hillel's questions. These are questions for all of us. What did I learn about God from the generation before me? What did I learn from my teachers about God? And what did I learn from my parents about God? Sometimes we have to actually stop and think about what we learned from our parents about God. And then turn around and say to myself, well, how am I going to teach that to the next generation? There are many, many different ways of different conceptions of God throughout the thousands of years of Jewish tradition. But how do we boil it down to one? Where do we make the start? How do we pick where we're going to create how we're going to describe this relationship that we have with God? There have been many attempts to find these core principles of the prime directives, if you will, about what Judaism is all about and what they teach us about God. And so we're going to go through just a few of them here. So I want to go to our first slide from the Sifra Kadoshim. And it's a famous one. I think that many people have heard this one before, that you should love your neighbor as yourself, from Vayikra. This Rabbi Kiva says that this is the all-embracing principle in the Torah. This is what the entire Torah boils down to. You should love your neighbor as yourself. But Ben Azai, his friend and a colleague, says that no, there's a better verse than that. That this is the numeration of the generations of Adam. Genesis chapter 5, verse 1, right? Where it talks about how everybody is descended from one person. And this Ben Azai says is an even greater principle. But what they're talking about here is is it about loving your neighbor, or is it about understanding that all of us are related and that we're not really separate, certainly not as separate as sometimes we consider ourselves to be. So Hillel, you want to pick up the next slide?
Yes, so I'll take the opportunity though just to say good morning to the other Rabbi Konigsberg. Hi Alba, and it's good to be here. So I'm Rabbi Hillel Konigsberg, and I'm in Sandy Springs, Georgia. I'm at Congregation B'nai Torah, and the Mishnah Sanhedrin really elaborates on this second point about the Ben Azai taught about the numerations of the generations of Adam, and the Mishnah, I don't know, it elaborates on it, but parallel to it offers the following wisdom, and it says, Adam, the first man, was created alone, and this was done due to the importance of maintaining peace among people, so that one person will not say to another, my ancestors are greater than yours. Which I think makes itself, self-evident. but really the idea of saying that if we all come from the same descendant, in a way, we are all interconnected. We are all part of one human family, which really says that this is what the principle of what really Torah is all about is really teaching us that everyone is all interconnected, and we have responsibilities, and maybe even familial ties and responsibilities one towards the other. So these two principles, one of saying that, the golden rule of loving your neighbor as yourself, and this second one about saying we're all part of the same family, kind of boils it down to these two core principles. But we also have this other series of laws. We have all the 613 biblical commandments that get boiled down further. So if we want to go ahead to the next slide.
Rabbi Simlai taught, and this is from Makot, from the Talmud, that there's 613 mitzvot consisting of 365 prohibitions corresponding to the number of days in the solar year. So you can not do something one day each year, and 248 positive mitzvot corresponding to the number of limbs, the positive things we do with our own bodies. So we know the 613 mitzvot. But Simlai goes ahead and says, no, according to King David in Psalm 15, that there are 11 core mitzvot, 11 basic mitzvot, and he sets them out here. Who should dwell upon your sacred mountain? The one who walks wholeheartedly, who works righteousness, speaks truth in his heart, no slander on his tongue, does no evil to neighbors, doesn't take up reproach against his relatives. In his eye, a vile person is to be despised, and honors the one who fears the Lord. And he takes an oath, even if it's to his own detriment, and he doesn't change his mind from that oath. He doesn't try to deny it, that just follows through on what he has promised. He neither gives his money with interest, and he certainly doesn't take a bribe against the innocent. And whoever performs these are the ones that shall not be moved. So it gives you, yes, it's 613 based, important. All of them are important, but King David draws them down to just 11. But it goes on to the next slide.
Which is itself a important kind of idea that 613 is a lot, but how can you get it down to even less than that? How can we boil it down? And the Talmud will continue by saying the following. So Isaiah came and established the 613 mitzvot upon 6. Right? So now we've gone like 613. How can you do all of them? Well, just follow these 6. So what is Isaiah write? He who walks righteously and speaks uprightly, he who despises the gain of oppressions, who shakes his hands from holding of bribes, who stops his ears from hearing blood, and shuts his eyes from looking upon evil. All right, so we got to 6, but Micah comes and brings it down to 3. So Rabbi Simlai's exposition will continue and says, "It has only been told to you, O man, what is good and what the Lord does require of you. Here it is, only to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God," which is a lot more digestible than even the 11 or the 6. But why leave it at 3 when you could boil it down to 2? And then Isaiah comes back and we have another one. So from Isaiah, so says the Lord, observe justice and perform righteousness. And then we have a little bit of a machloket, a little bit of disagreement, but it can get boiled down further to these one principles at the very end within Amos at first, right? So Amos boils it down to 1. So says the Lord to the house of Israel, seek me and live. But Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak objects to this, rather say, Habakkuk came and established the 613 mitzvot upon a different one, as it is stated, but the righteous person shall live by his faith. All right, so where do we get from all of these commandments? Boiling it down to these 4. To this one, or rather this pair of single commandments or these single principles, and how does that relate to the other one that we saw a little bit before? So I think we have a summary on our final slide, which shows us the just to put them all up there one by one next to each other. And we saw that the first principle was one where we love our neighbor as ourselves, the golden rule. And I think that most people would expect this to be up there in the core principles of Judaism. That the whole point of this religious endeavor that we are on is that golden rule. And I don't know if the screen has changed, but I think there is one more slide past this that just has the summary that has all of these teachings on it. The second one being that, Adam being the first man, that man was created alone, which really teaches us that we're all part of the same family. And then the last two, which we just saw from Rav Simlai's exposition about boiling it down, the seek me being God, and live, but the righteous person shall live by his faith. And when you look at these four kind of teachings, I think that they are they operate under two different kind of categories of teaching. One is about what you should do, and one is about what you should believe, right? And when it comes down to the golden rule and Adam being the first man, it's really about how we are acting in the world. And seek me and live, but the righteous shall live by their faith is more about what you believe in God. And when through this conversation with my dad, as we were exploring like how is and I could say it to you, but like how you have taught me about God, and as I reflect about that, right? God is such a big concept. It's so hard to really be able to point down. I remember when we were talking about it back and forth that a lot of the time, a lot of the imagery and a lot of the things that you said about God, I was saying, well, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if that speaks to me. I don't know if that's something that is really true to my own practice. But when it came down to the actual core principles, well, of course, right? I try to live my life, right, in the same way that you've taught me, like morally, like trying to love our neighbors as ourselves, trying to remember we're all part of the same human family, right? Of course, those types of teachings kind of come in as well. And as we think about that, we thought it was important to kind of, take a step back. Well, I don't know, like, let's take a moment to explain who our gods are and what our belief in God really is, because I think that is the core principle. That is a place to start of what this religion and Judaism is all about. Really gets to our ultimate concerns about what is God. But I think the question that we want to circle back to at the end will be, well, great. Now that we know of these two differing views of God, which I think we just have to put out there because they were a little bit different one from the other. But then circle back and say, well, great. With that view of God, how do you go back to these core principles of loving your neighbor as yourself and being able to remember that we're all part of the same family? What are you teaching specifically to your children if your teachings of God are so complicated? So, Abba, why don't you share with everyone what you've shared with me about your belief of God and what that might mean to you specifically?
So in the end, God is a very personal decision. I mean, how we're going to see God, how we're going to look at God is a very personal view. I personally been a follower, and I guess I learned this from Art Green, Rabbi Art Green, one of my teachers, that while God, is greater than this universe, God is far beyond anything that this universe has to offer, but that this universe is filled with God, that everything has some elements of God in it, that makes it something that's important, something that's vital, and something that has purpose in the larger picture of things. So God, of course, is God. But God is found in everything. God is found in everyone. And part of what we do is we try to find that element of God in everything that is around us. And that applies not just to things, but it also applies, I think, to our relationships. And this comes down to some of the things that Martin Buber taught, that our relationships themselves are holy. Our relationships are filled with God as well. And if we allow God in, if we let ourselves find that piece of holiness in the relationships that we have. So if we're looking for God in everything, the responsibility that we have is to not only find that God in everything, but to reveal it, to bring it out into the world. The world is all God. We seek that God, and then we teach that God to others. So when we talk about mitzvot, we talk about they're divided to there's some that we do for God's sake, but some of them we do bein adam v'chaviro, that we do on behalf of other people. And the way we do these mitzvot is by bringing out the divinity that we have in each other, to sort of reveal that which is God within ourselves, and strengthen, therefore, our relationships, strengthen, and through the relationship, strengthen the world.
Yeah, and I remember when we were talking about that. I mean, that wasn't a shock to me, because luckily I feel like in our household we spoke about God often, and it was something that I've thought about, and I've known the way that you've approached God, but also recognize that as you've been on your own journey, right? You also you have refined and continued to understand your own approach to God as well. I'm sure has evolved too. Excuse me. But I when it comes to my God, my understanding, we're talking about the same God, but my understanding of what God is, it really comes more from a naturalism kind of perspective. One of really saying really thinking about our own human nature, really thinking about where we as human beings, or really as creatures, kind of situate our ultimate concerns. So for example, I remember in a very early formative memory with me, thinking with my brother, with Eitan, thinking about what is the core kind of principle of belief for us. And we were recognizing that the universe the big cosmos has all of these randomness and all of these probabilities, right? There's so much immensity in the cosmos. And to say well, it could just be that if you run the numbers and there's so much randomness, perhaps, right, that there isn't, the reason we're here is just because of the chances are not that small at all, given the grand scheme of things just everywhere. But rather, there's a moment that we have as creatures to say, well, do our lives, is it just random, or is there actually meaning? Is there something that we can do intentionally to have purpose in our lives? And whether that's a biological claim, which I might believe is true, right? This notion that as human creatures, we are always fighting homeostasis, right? We're maintaining homeostasis. We're trying to, have the right nutrients and the right resources in order to kind of, fight entropy and be able to live in the world. And as we do that, right, we're making a conscious choice that it's better to live. And once you make that choice, you're now saying, well, there's something better, meaning of saying, well, life has meaning. And to me, that's the core of what God really is this notion of saying, I'm going to live a life of meaning, which is kind of why I like that piece of the end from Amos, so the seek me and live, right? Because we're saying, if we are trying to find the meaning in the world, then in a way, as we seek God and really living, right, is really that choice of finding meaning in the world. But because of this, for me, right, you speak about a God that we're in relationship with. For me, God and my ultimate concern is more not as God as a noun, which I'm not necessarily sure necessarily is something that you overtly will make a claim about. But for me, God is more of an adjective or an adverb, or even a verb, I mean to say, that it's not something that is, but something rather that you do, or there are characteristics that can be called divine, and that as we go through life, that we are really striving, as we're finding meaning in life, we're really striving to live up to those attributes and those characteristics that we place as really high, as supreme to all other characteristics. And to me, that's a little bit of what God is. And, it's something that's a little more, it's not necessarily tangible. It's not a thing or a being, but rather it's more about our experiences and more about our own natural kind of thinking and meaning making in the world. When we think about all the commandments, when we think about how we are going to teach these to our children, I think it becomes interesting to me, because at the very large core about why do anything, and why is this religion, why is Judaism something that we should do, right? I could teach God, and we could say, well, here's what my God is, but because it's so personalized, I suspect that everyone else who is listening to us, then they too have their own understandings of God and their own relationship with God that's colored by their experience of reading the Torah and their experience of the Siddur and of their own life experiences, and maybe even what their parents and family and friends have taught them about God. So in a way, who am I to sit up here and say, well, here is what God means, and therefore you must adopt and kind of believe what I say. And I think the proof in the pudding of that as well, Abba, is that you have your belief of God and I have my belief of God. Yet yet we both agree of like saying, well, here's what it means to live a life of meaning and a life of righteousness. So I think that when we have to kind of take a step back and say, great, what do we do with these notions of God, right? Okay, great. We looked at these sources. We looked at, the piece from Amos and Habakkuk and said, seek me and live, and a person should live by their faith. And we said that here, those are the things that it boils down to, but we can't teach that to others. Well, what can you teach and what does it come down to? And I think that that's where our language, your language of the Ben Adam Makom versus the Ben Adam Chavero, Ben Adam Atzmo, right? These mitzvot that are between us and God, right, is everything. Our whole relationship really hinges on seeking God and living. Yet all the other commandments, like everything can be categorized as like, are we doing this also for ourselves, Ben Adam Atzmo, or is it also Ben Adam Chavero? There are also these elements of being in relationship with one another. And which I really think brings us back to the first two principles of loving your neighbor as yourself, and brings us to the other one saying we are all part of the same human family. So if I had to boil it down, right, to think about like what is these how do I teach it? Like what specifically am I teaching it? Right? Could we just, I guess we did teach these sources, but in our own way, what would we do? Right? I would say, okay, so at the core principle, if there's any creed in Judaism, I would argue that it is belief, a monotheistic belief in God, whatever that might be for people. But I think that when it really comes down to it, that the idea really is to say that that we want to be able to live with God, like we want to be able to take those divine attributes. We want to be able to apply them to how we live our lives. And for me, the summary piece that I would strive each day to teach to my children would be something along the lines of saying, our actions matter, and you have the responsibility to improve yourself and the world. Right? That our actions matter, and you have the responsibility to improve yourselves and the world. Because I think that's what really Judaism is all about, that all of these commandments are all about. And after we get to the seek me and live, or that you should live by your faith, after you get to this notion that the world has meaning and that life has meaning, I think that you have to say, well, great. So what that means is your actions matter, right? That there is a truth, that is the good in the world, and you have the responsibility, right? Not just like it would be nice if you did, but rather take a look and make yourself the best that you can be and make the world better than you found it. To me, that is what Judaism is all about. And that is, I think, the concrete piece, right? My kids will believe whatever they believe about God. But hopefully, if I really want to feel successful, I think that, and my students as well, I think would really be about your actions matter and that you have the responsibility to improve yourself and other people.
So I guess I take it from a less practical, more spiritual kind of an approach than you do, because I want to really teach children. I want to teach my students. I want to teach others that that we need to find God everywhere, that we consider each moment, what it is in this moment, what's going on in the world right now, to figure out what God is expecting from us by searching out our hearts and searching out our minds and trying to understand what is required in this moment. How do we take this God that we find in the world, and how do we reveal it? We study so that we know what is expected, no matter where we are and what we are doing. It's a way so God speaks to us and tells us what is required in our moment. But we are God's partners. To me, that we live our lives as if we are God's partners. We live by our faith. Our actions reflect what God requires. A righteous person, as Habakkuk says, lives by his faith. We have this faith. What does it call us to do? What does it call us what does it call us to act in this world at each moment as our lives unfold? It's a journey. We're on this journey, and as part of this journey, we have to fill the requirements that we find that God calls us to act. So that's it's a big picture, right? What is it that we have different views of God, and yet I'd say are we teaching anything that's really remarkably different?
I don't know. I think most people would get to the same idea as well. They're like, all of Judaism really boils down to our belief in God, right? And really being able to, the way that we act in the world, and really being responsible of trying to seek that meaning and really trying to figure out what does our faith act bring us to do, right? In the same way, we frame it in whatever words we do, but I think we're saying this exact same thing. And you wouldn't know, I mean, like, we present ourselves today with this really nice, like, organized thought, but like, I remember like our conversations were like quite animated. I remember like, my frustration and being like, what are you saying, Abba? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I think what's nice, about it, and I think we can encourage other people to do as well, is, for those who have the opportunity to be able to share with their loved ones their own belief of God and really be able to figure out what language and vocabulary they use about it. And then at the end of the day as well, being able to say, well, if you boil it down, like, what is this really all about? I think that's like the core piece that I feel appreciative that you spent the time talking to me about. And if there's anything I would want to model to my kids as well, being able to kind of teach them a little bit about what it boils down to and what this religion thing is all about as well. Because oftentimes we don't try to give the vocabulary for it, then we just kind of like hope that they pick up on it. But sometimes I think you have to be a little more explicit than just kind of, hold your breath and maybe something will sink in.
Well, I should tell you, that in all that frustration that I gave you, I said, but it helped me refine my thinking too. It helped me focus my thinking. It helped me find my way to describe it better and to reinforce in myself what is the real essence of my understanding of God. Because if I can't teach it to you, how am I going to teach it to anybody else?
Right. And then I guess we could end with a blessing, with these insights and ideas. We're saying, saying to other people as well, as we celebrate as where we started, right? As we are celebrating the revelation of Torah and the study of Torah, and really thinking about our relationship of God and what God expects of us. Or to end with this blessing, to say that, it's our prayer that everyone has the opportunity to refine, their own understanding of God, and again, having those opportunities to have their pain in the neck children be able to help them refine their own understandings, but of their students or loved ones, being able to kind of reflect back to them so they can be in their own, be able to be in their own understanding, to refine it themselves, and be able to communicate it succinctly so that another generation can pick up the torch and be able to kind of, be able to hit the core principles of what we believe and what is most important to us.
It's going to be interesting for me to see how you teach it to my grandchildren.
No pressure.
Wow, that was really something special, and I got to tell you, I'm here in Boston, and my son happens to be right here on the floor. I think you guys might have seen him a couple times, and he's working on some Legos, and it's really special for me to listen to the two of you talk and wonder about what conversations I may have with him, as he grows up. To take him from building Legos to building theology. And I'm sure though that there were times where Hillel was on the floor playing with Legos too. Is that right, Randy?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing right before speaking anyway.
That's right. Okay, and he's very proud of his work. Well, thank you so much to the Rabbis Konigsberg for that wonderful, both the teaching itself was profound and thoughtful, but just the very notion that the two of you would have this opportunity to reflect on how your relationship developed and honed your own theologies. It's a different kind of special. And so I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to watch that happen and unfold here. So thank you so much.